Take off that medal before you speak to this court. The judge's voice sliced through the room like a blade, cold, sharp, and final. The old man on the witness stand didn't move. His hands trembled slightly. He wore a faded blue blazer, and right above his heart, a silver star quietly shimmered. People in the courtroom shifted in their seats. Some looked away, some smirked. But the old man didn't say a word. He just looked at the judge, not with defiance, but with the weight of decades in his silence. Then, someone stood up from the back. A man in full military uniform. His chest was covered in medals. His eyes were steel, and his voice was deep and calm. "Permission to speak, Your Honor?" Just 5 words. And in that moment, the judge's career was over, and a nation was reminded what true honor really means. That morning, the courtroom was packed. Not because the case was interesting, it was just a boring property dispute. But word had spread, not through newspapers or TV, just whispers. That man, he was going to testify. When he walked in, he didn't speak to anyone. No lawyer, no family, just quiet dignity, worn-out black shoes, and that old blue blazer. The medal on his chest? Simple, silent, unshakable. A silver star, the second highest military honor for valor in combat. Most people had never seen one in real life. But Judge Arthur Klein didn't seem impressed. He was known for being strict, allergic to drama, and obsessed with keeping his courtroom just the way he liked it. No emotions, no ceremony, no baggage from the past. He had no military background, but he had plenty of ambition. He entered like he always did, cold, efficient, and without a smile. As he sat down, his eyes locked on the medal on the old man's chest. He didn't say anything at first. He waited. He was going to make a statement, his courtroom, his rules. And then it came. "Mr. Daniel Moreno, please take the witness stand." The room went dead silent. Daniel stood slowly. Every movement was deliberate, shaped by years of discipline. As he walked to the stand, he didn't look around or react to the whispers. He just walked. And just as he was about to sit, the judge leaned forward, tilted his head slightly, and said, "Before we begin, remove that medal. This is a courtroom, not a parade." Silence. Time itself seemed to pause. Someone in the back caught their breath. A lawyer shifted uncomfortably in their seat. But Daniel Moreno didn't respond. He just looked at the judge. Not angry, not defiant, just tired. The kind of tired you get from carrying silence your whole life. Judge Klein wasn't used to silence. He leaned back and repeated the command. "Take off the medal, Mr. Moreno, or I won't allow you to speak." And that's when something in the room changed. Not Daniel, but the room. Everyone held their breath. Some lifted their heads. Others couldn't take their eyes off him. Slowly, Daniel reached up, unclipped the medal, and gently placed it on the wooden table next to the microphone, like folding a flag without ceremony. Then he sat down. His hands rested in his lap, his eyes somewhere between the past and now. The medal just sat there, next to the mic, lifeless, displaced. A symbol of honor stripped bare under a black robe. The courtroom was quiet again. The judge shifted, satisfied. He turned to the lawyer and said, "Proceed." The lawyer stepped forward a bit too quickly and began. "Mr. Moreno, please state your name and profession." Daniel didn't move at first. Then, with a low, heavy voice, he replied, "Daniel Francisco Moreno, retired, former aircraft mechanic and member of the 1st Cavalry Division." He didn't say it with pride, he said it with certainty, like something carved in stone. As the lawyer recorded Daniel Moreno's statement, the room was still wrapped in a thick, heavy silence. No one cared about the property dispute anymore. All eyes were fixed on one thing, the silver star sitting next to the microphone, and the man who used to wear it. Daniel was speaking, but more than his words, it was the quiet strength behind them that echoed in the room. The lawyer continued, "Were you on the property the day of the incident, Mr. Moreno?" Daniel didn't lower his head, didn't break eye contact with the judge. "Yes, around 6:30 in the morning. Same as always. I was at the front gate." "Was the gate locked?" "No, it never was. I've had the key since 1989. Manuel Collins, the landowner, gave it to me. He said, 'Come and go as you wish.' Because his brother was my sergeant. And that sergeant didn't make it home." That sentence just hung in the air. No one spoke, not even the judge. Klein's fingers tapped on the bench, soft but arrogant, enough to irritate. As the lawyer asked more questions, most people in the room had stopped taking notes. Maps, documents, sketches all forgotten. Everyone's eyes stayed on Daniel. He didn't feel like just a witness anymore. He felt like a living page from a history book that no one had ever written. Then the opposing attorney stood up. He was young, polished, smooth. His suit was perfect, his voice calm but empty. "Mr. Moreno, don't memories fade over time? Can you really be sure of what you remember?" Daniel paused. He turned his head slightly, didn't even raise an eyebrow. His voice was almost a whisper, but his words hit like steel. "I remember the name of the boy under me. The one who died when I pulled him from the chopper. I haven't forgotten his name. So no, I haven't forgotten whether the gate was locked." The lawyer's lips tightened. He didn't push it. Any word out of his mouth now would have only made him look smaller. Judge Klein saw a chance. He leaned forward, raising his voice with authority. "This courtroom isn't a memorial. We deal with facts here, not feelings. How many medals you wear doesn't matter. If you want respect, start by following the rules." That sentence shifted the air, not like a breeze, but like a cold storm. Women clutched their purses. Some men straightened up in their seats. And for the first time, Daniel raised his head and looked the judge in the eye. There was no anger in his gaze, but there was no fear either. And somehow, that look calm, steady was enough to rattle a judge with 20 years on the bench. Then, from the back corner of the courtroom, someone stood up. No one had noticed him come in. He'd been sitting quietly in the last row. "Your Honor, may I speak?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than an entire marching unit. Everyone turned. He wore a dark green military dress uniform, his posture perfect, his shoes polished like glass. And among all the medals on his chest, one stood out: the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration. He didn't move forward. He just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, still as a statue. Judge Klein adjusted his glasses. There was a tension on his face he didn't recognize. "This is a court of law," Klein said. "If you're not a witness or an attorney," the man cut in. "I'm neither. But I served 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. And I won't sit here and stay silent while a decorated veteran is disrespected." You could hear a pin drop. Time froze. Daniel Moreno was still seated. The silver star still lay by the mic. But now, every eye was on the man standing. Slowly, others began to stand too. One in the back, then another. All silent. All soldiers. One removed his cap. Another lifted his chin. No one said a word. But by simply standing, they said everything. Judge Klein looked out over the courtroom, and for the first time, he realized he'd lost control. His jaw tightened, but the man in uniform took one step forward. The only sound was his boots echoing on the tile. He walked up to the microphone, picked up the silver star with both hands, held it like it wasn't just metal, but something with a soul. "This," he said, voice steady but rising, "isn't an ornament. It's a glowing headstone." And the room stayed completely still. The man held the silver star in his hands and turned to look at Daniel Moreno. The room was still quiet, but it wasn't just silence anymore. It was truth, swallowed all at once. Everyone felt it. This wasn't just the end of a hearing, it was the collapse of an entire mindset. He held the medal like a headstone. His voice didn't rise, but every word hit like a slap. Mr. Moreno didn't wear this medal for show. He earned it years ago carrying a man out of a chopper wreck, covered in blood. I was one of those men." His words hit the floor like stones, slow, heavy, and irreversible. Judge Klein's lip twitched. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The gavel in his hand looked more like a toy than a symbol of power. The man took another step forward. "To you, silencing him was about order. To us, it's about memory. He doesn't speak because he doesn't need to. He's lived his entire life in silence. But you tried to crush that silence. This isn't just a case anymore, Judge Klein. This is a test of conscience. And you put arrogance on the scales." Klein leaned back in his chair. For a brief moment, his eyes flicked toward Daniel, but not to question him, to look for some kind of defense. Daniel's eyes hadn't changed. Still cold, still steady, still judging. The man offered the medal back to Daniel. "You don't have to wear it again," he said. "But remember, you didn't take it off. Someone just acted like they had the right to." Daniel slowly stood up. There was no youth in his steps, but there was dignity. He took the medal, didn't pin it back on, just held it in his hand, then gave a small nod. He didn't say a word. He didn't shed a tear. But with every second of silence, the room grew more ashamed. The man turned to the judge. Today, a decorated veteran was publicly humiliated. In your courtroom, in front of the people, in front of the eyes of men who served with him. I won't be the one to make you pay for that. But make no mistake, you will pay. Then he turned and began to walk away. Before reaching the door, he paused. And then it began one by one. People stood up. No applause, no cheers, just silence. Because standing was the most honorable thing anyone could do in that moment. And they all stood, except one, Judge Klein. He stayed seated. But he wasn't a judge anymore. He was just a man, stripped of power, stripped of authority, and most of all stripped of respect. The hearing ended early that day. The official reason? Procedural review. But everyone knew the truth. Arthur Klein couldn't speak anymore. And even if he did, no one would listen. Daniel was the last to leave the courtroom. He adjusted his blazer, didn't put the medal in his pocket, but he didn't let go of it either. Outside, the crowd slowly dispersed. No journalists had been allowed in. But whispers always find a way. Because some stories don't need headlines to spread. Some moments travel a nation without a single camera. Daniel climbed into his old truck just like always. He didn't expect applause. Never had. All he ever did was keep carrying his silence. But on that day, his silence became a roar. And everyone who left that room didn't just witness a hearing. They witnessed something much bigger. For some, it was a lesson in what justice isn't. For others, in what honor truly is. But for everyone, something changed. Because sometimes, a courtroom ruling has less impact than a quiet stand. Sometimes, a single look, a silent moment, can awaken the conscience of an entire nation. The morning after the hearing, the town was quiet. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that comes when nothing's happening. It was the kind that comes when everything has changed. People sipped their coffee in silence, their thoughts circling just one question. Who was that man? And why did we all stay silent? No official media outlet had shared any footage from inside the courtroom. But in the age of technology, truth doesn't respect barriers. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet press of the record button on a phone, and the walls of an entire system begin to crack. A young man sitting in the very back row during the hearing had been filming. It wasn't his voice, but his father's silent strength that moved him. The video had no sound, but it didn't need it. The moment that man in uniform stood up, the silver star placed beside the microphone, and the fear that flickered across the judge's face, it was all captured. Before sunset, the footage had already made its way online. No flashy title, just a simple upload. The honor of a man. Comments came first, then shares. In the first few hours, just a few thousand views. But by midnight, numbers stopped making sense. Veterans, teenagers, women, lawyers, even a few judges, all shared the same clip. Some wrote nothing but, "Watch this." Others said, "We were silent." He was silent. But now, no more. The next morning, across the country, on TV, in radio shows, on morning panels, the same question echoed everywhere. What exactly did Judge Arthur Klein do? And then, slowly, another name began to surface. Daniel Francisco Moreno. No one knew who he was. He hadn't given interviews. No social media. Just a retired mechanic with an old toolbox, a tiny house, and a vintage radio as his only friend. But now, people were marching in his name, all over the country. The most striking reaction came from one of the oldest veterans organizations in the nation. One of its founders, on live TV, holding back tears, said, "That medal wasn't just taken from his chest. It was taken from all of ours. And it was placed on the table in silence." This wasn't a battle, but it was a battle against forgetting. The first official complaint against Judge Klein landed just 2 days after the hearing. Within a week, over 200 more followed. Some came from active duty officers, some from retired generals, some from legal scholars. Each one said the same thing, that what happened in that courtroom wasn't just personal disrespect, it was a blow to the honor of the entire country. But Arthur Klein said nothing. He declined interviews. His office remained locked. He wasn't seen. Slowly, his name began disappearing from the court's schedule. First a week off, then 2 weeks for health reasons. And finally, on a quiet Friday morning, a cold, simple announcement from court administration. He had chosen early retirement. No ceremony, no farewell speech. His exit was as cold and silent as the moment he tried to crush someone else's pride. Daniel Moreno never left. He still lived in the same house, on the same quiet street. Every morning, he'd step out onto his porch with a cup of coffee and look at the sky. But now, strangers passing by looked at him differently. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with respect. And some of those looks were so deep, so full, Daniel found it impossible to look away. Because in their eyes, he saw something returning, a long-lost understanding of dignity, born from silence. About a month later, a photo began circulating online. It wasn't high quality, shot from a distance, no location tagged, but it didn't matter. Daniel stood before a memorial wall, wearing his blue blazer, the silver star pinned back on his chest. No judge around, no gavel, just him, and standing silently behind him, the man in uniform from the courtroom, saying nothing, just standing, like he was guarding something sacred. The media named it the Vigil of Honor. That photo now hangs on the walls of military academies, law schools, and public buildings across the nation. Because sometimes a courtroom ruling fades with time, but the silence of a man can etch itself into a nation's memory. Just a few weeks had passed, but it felt like a year had gone by. What happened in that small courtroom wasn't just a memory anymore. It was the spark of something bigger. The entire country was still talking about Daniel Moreno's quiet stand. His name wasn't buried in court files anymore. It was scribbled in the notebooks of students. Yes, he had been a witness, but not to a property line dispute. He had witnessed how easily honor could be humiliated. There was no official account for him on social media, but one sentence kept appearing in thousands of posts. He didn't speak. We stayed silent. But now, we carry that silence. In universities, law classes began differently, not with lectures about the Constitution, but with a photo of Daniel's face, his eyes. The first question professors asked was, when does the law stop being just? And the answer? It lived in a single video. A man being told to take off his medal, but never once letting go of his honor. At a military academy, Daniel Moreno's testimony was added to the year-end reading list. Every cadet had to read it out loud before graduating. Because leadership wasn't just about giving orders anymore, it was also about understanding silence. But Daniel knew none of this. He didn't want to. His world was still the same. A quiet living room under the soft swing of an old chain lamp. His bookshelf still held military history books, dusty now, untouched, because Daniel didn't need to read the past. He had lived it. Each morning, he'd wake up and see the silver star resting on a small wooden stand. Not locked behind glass, not pinned to a wall, just there. A quiet companion that lived with him, but never said a word. One day, there was a knock at the door. Standing outside was a boy maybe 16, holding a small envelope, his eyes full of uncertainty and respect. "Mr. Moreno," he said, "we're doing a school project about you. Could I ask you a few questions?" Daniel didn't fully open the door. He paused, standing at the edge between youthful curiosity and the weight of his past. Then he nodded. "I don't have to tell you anything," he said. "But if you want to listen, come in." The boy sat down, opened a notebook. But Daniel didn't speak. He just pointed to a small frame on the wall. There was no photo inside, just a handwritten sentence. "True honor isn't meant to be shown. It's meant to be carried." The boy looked up from his notes. "Is that something you said?" he asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, a friend of mine. Back in that courtroom, everyone else was speaking, but he stayed silent. And somehow, everyone heard him." The boy didn't write anything after that. He put his pen down. Some things you don't take notes on. You just feel them. That same night, the boy gave his presentation to his class. No photos, no medals, just silence. And then, he began. Some men shout their way into history, but some, they say nothing at all and make thousands go silent. Daniel Moreno was one of the quiet ones. After that day, students across the country repeated the same talk. Videos were made, quotes were shared, but at the center of it all was a medal that a man didn't put back on his jacket. That silver star had become a symbol, not just of war, but of shame, resistance, and rebirth. And the man it belonged to? He was still sitting in the same chair every morning, still quiet, still not speaking much. But to those who asked him about it, he always said the same thing. "I didn't say anything. You were the ones who spoke." Years passed. That day in the courtroom now felt like a distant memory. Judge Arthur Klein's name had long since faded, buried deep in forgotten archives. His campaign plans were abandoned. His name removed from plaques at the courthouse. No statue, no building ever bore his name. He quietly vanished, one of the erased. But Daniel Moreno's name? It took a different path. There were no monuments named after him, no ceremonies held in his honor. Yet every year, on the same day, across the country, in high schools, academies, and military bases, young people stood in silence for 1 full minute. This moment wasn't tied to any war anniversary, not to any election. It wasn't about noise. It was about rising in silence. They called it the Moreno Minute. No one clapped. No speeches were made. Because everyone knew, some acts of courage echo only in silence. Daniel never watched these tributes. He stayed on the outside of that world. He simply lived. Every morning at 8 a.m., he opened his curtains, drank coffee from the same mug, sat in the same chair. But the weight inside his silence, it wasn't his alone anymore. There was a generation now carrying it with him. Young people who stood up without saying a word, who gave answers without ever speaking. One morning, just like any other, an envelope showed up in his mailbox. It wasn't sealed. Inside were just 3 things: an old black and white photo, a small note with the words, "Because of you, I lived," and one line, typed on aged paper, "That day, you were silent. And we grew." Daniel held the photo, a young soldier in front of a helicopter wreck, carrying someone on his back, his uniform soaked in blood. But his face showed something else, determination. And it felt familiar. Daniel stared at it for a long time, then slowly bowed his head. His hand reached for the medal. He placed his palm over the silver star and turned to the window. Sunlight was hitting the wall, and for the first time, the medal glimmered, like it had been waiting years to quietly speak. That same evening, in a home far away, a boy turned to his father. "Dad, who's Daniel Moreno?" The man paused, then pulled his son gently onto his knee and whispered, "I've never met him, but his voice, it taught me what's right." "What do you mean?" "Because sometimes, to know something is right, you don't need someone to shout it. You just need someone to stand tall and not let it go." That night, somewhere in the country, an old man closed his eyes. No announcement, no sirens, just one window light, fading quietly. By morning, the news had spread. Daniel Francisco Moreno had passed away. His funeral wasn't crowded, but he had never lived for crowds. 2 men stood at his grave, one in uniform, the other in civilian clothes. No flowers in their hands, no tears in their eyes, but both wore a small symbol on their chests, a silver star. And that star? It wasn't just a medal anymore. It was a memory, a lesson, a responsibility. Daniel Moreno's name may never appear in textbooks, but ink can't erase what's written in the hearts of people, because he was the man who taught a generation through silence. Years later, one of those kids grew up, became a lawyer. On the day of his first trial, as he walked up to the bench, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small note, tucked carefully in the inner lining. It read, "Laws can fail, but honor never does." And that day, once again, a courtroom fell silent, because some words, even if they're never spoken again, continue to echo in every case that matters.